with everything else going on in the world, in Europe and in the Middle East, one has perhaps taken one's eyes off or forgotten that there is a very big military dog, as it were, in the Far East called China. And China, every now and again, likes to flex its military muscles to remind everybody that they are there. I think from a strategic position, one is not surprised that China is reminding everybody what it's all about. And it's usually been around comments that the Chinese leadership have made about US tax on Iran, what's happening in Ukraine. And a lot of people are blaming China for prolonging the war in Ukraine by providing drones and electronics to the Russians. Having said all that, this particular act down in the Red Sea off Djibouti, which is, I think, the only port in the world which is a US military port and a Chinese military port. So there's always chance for challenges there. At the moment, there is this NATO mission to protect ships, European ships and others going through the Red Sea from Houthi attack. That's why they're all there. That's why there are German jets, NATO jets flying around. Now, for a Chinese frigate, as I understand, to fire a laser at a NATO aircraft is incredibly, incredibly dangerous thing to do. And you just wonder why exactly they've done it. Maybe, maybe the commander of that Chinese ship, took it on themselves to do it. Now, one doesn't know what sort of laser it is. A lot of time when you are acquiring targets, you use the laser to identify what the range to that target is. So that is not necessarily a laser that's going to, bring the aircraft down. But of course, if the point of that laser, hit the eyes of the pilot, it could bring the plane down. So one doesn't know what laser was fired, but it is incredibly provocative and seems to be completely unwarranted. And the exacerbation of the German government is to be expected. And it would be interesting to see what the Chinese have to say about it. But, it's clear this is an area down at the bottom of the Red Sea between Djibouti and also between Yemen that is a real flashpoint. And there is obviously a lot of military hardware down there, be it American, NATO, and Chinese as well, quite apart from the Houthis who are trying to take out shipping. So, yeah, it seems to be a provocative and unrequired incident that could easily spark something much more. But it's also a reminder that China have a very big dog in this fight. In these sort of instances, that there are sort of some fairly standard protocols of what you do. I suppose at the end of the day, nobody's been killed, nobody's been hurt. And what I'm sure what all sides don't want this to escalate any further. And, a slapping of the wrists and a good old shout. And everybody around the world knows it now. And I expect the Chinese, whatever they're trying to achieve, they've also been made to look a little bit stupid too, because, they might have thought that they could get away with this, but actually, this is now blown up into an international row, which I can't imagine the Chinese planned at the outset. So I wouldn't expect to see much more of this, a bit more ranting from the West and European NATO countries. And I don't suppose there'll be a massive apologies from the Chinese, but, this sort of thing happens. And I think we should be thankful that at least nobody's been injured or killed. I think we have to be very wary about China, and certainly the latest British Strategic Defence Review announced last month really pointed that China is a major threat. And when you look at the US and you look at what Trump is saying, and Pete Hegseth, the US defense minister, their focus is all on China. It's all on the Far East. They're not that interested in what's happening in Europe because they know that China is the country that economically and militarily could really hurt the US. It's well documented that China has been spending a fortune on its defense in the last few years, building more tanks and ships than anybody else, and also quietly building more nuclear weapons than anybody else, although they still are vastly small, but vastly, overmatched by the US and others. They are building nuclear weapons faster than anybody else. There is the fairly obvious and well-discussed flashpoint of Taiwan, which China has often talked about reclaiming for China. And that is a flashpoint with the US, because the US and President Trump have very clearly said that that would be unacceptable. And, part of the US fleet is in that area. Even the British fleet, our aircraft carrier and its supporting vessels, are in that area as well. So I think China is a country that one has to watch very carefully, and its growing military capability makes it more dangerous. But I suppose ultimately one has to hope that the Chinese desire for economic development outrides their desire for conflict. And I suppose Trump plays the game that he knows that the US is the biggest market for China. The tariff war we're talking about at the moment, you can see it ebbing and flowing. So in grand geostrategic politics, there's a heck of a lot going on at the moment. And China is very, very much part of that. And must just hope that there are some real level heads at the top to try and prevent these things blowing up in something more than a shouting match that they are at the moment.